Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say. And in this video, I got some stories from Texas that are of, just really strange things happening there. So definitely, pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. So I don't usually do this a whole lot. I normally just lurk. But since it's the holidays, as of January, I've been able to hear more stories from my dad, so I think y'all might enjoy. The first couple are from my grandpa. I heard stories about my grandpa ever since I was a kid. He was my dad's dad, and he had experienced a lot in life, and this in turn generated some of the most amazing stories I had ever heard in my childhood. After the Korean War, he became a law enforcement officer in Lubbock, Texas in the late 50s, being the first Hispanic to be employed in the Texas civil service system there. And then, from 1960 to 67, he served as a Texas Border Patrol agent, becoming one of the first of 5 Hispanics to be employed by that agency up to that time. He later worked for the U.S. Customs Agency Service and the DEA in the 70s. My dad always told me some amazing stories, and not all of them fit here, and some are not fit for me to share, but he has 2 that, although did not happen to him, have been told to my dad, who later told them to me, in pretty good detail. So, the next 2 stories take place between 1960 and 1967. My dad's family was living in the southwest Texas town of Eagle Pass, which is a border town that borders the Mexican city of Piedras Negras. My grandpa was doing border patrol work there and in the nearby border towns that are scattered along the Rio Grande River. So, I'll call this first one the sand trap. Now, before I get into this first story, I have to explain what a sand trap is. It's not necessarily a trap exactly. There are some spots along the Rio Grande that are low enough to cross over without much effort. These areas are patrolled, but can't be monitored 24/7, especially back then. So sometimes, immigrants pass through without detection. In places where the brush wasn't too thick, they would throw down layers of sand and smooth it out. This allowed them to monitor and count footprints and track who or how many people were crossing the river and into the U.S. My grandpa worked the morning shift and arrived at the station to supposedly catch up on paperwork and get some coffee. That's when he found the late-night officer, who I'll refer to as Mr. L, at the station, back from his post, earlier than he should have been. He was pale and looking very distraught. Grandpa asked Mr. L what his deal was, and he was told the following story. Mr. L had been hearing rumors of some creepy post out in Del Rio, a town about half an hour north of Eagle Pass. Essentially, there was a low point in the river where immigrants would cross and enter private ranch land. Multiple BP agents would be sent to check the sand trap to see if there was anything turning up, but they never got any footprints. They needed someone out there to monitor it more closely. However, nobody wanted to stay after dark. The area was rumored to be unsettling and quite possibly haunted. Mr. L thought this was a crock of shit. My dad describes Mr. L as a very tall man, shaved head, and very tough. The kind of person that doesn't take any bullshit. He decided that he would go out there himself at night and show these other guys that they're just being a bunch of sissies. He drives out to the Del Rio station and starts getting ready. A lot of the guys were telling him not to worry about it. They can just check the trap in the morning for footprints. and showed obvious signs of concern, but of course, he brushed it off and was handed a large ring of keys. The keys were to unlock the multiple ranch gates in the county, as he would be driving deep into the middle of nowhere and through multiple properties. He got in his service vehicle and made sure he had all the supplies that he needed, and took off down the old county road, and then would later turn off into a gated ranch road. It took him over an hour of passing through multiple gates and driving unkempt dirt roads just to get to the spot. He left in the late afternoon, and by the time he arrived at the post, dusk was just upon him. He said the spot was loaded with mesquite and creosote and all sorts of bush. You couldn't walk through the bush unless you had a bush hog tractor clear the place out. There was, however, a small worn path leading from the river that you could get through just barely. This is where the sand trap was placed, since it served as a choke point for any foot traffic. Of course, the trap is devoid of any footprints, so he settles down and waits for nightfall. The night was pretty uneventful. The moon was out and lit up the area in a dim, ethereal light. The air was still, and despite being out in the middle of nowhere in Texas, there weren't many of the usual night sounds that he was accustomed to. He says he would have fallen asleep, but the lack of sound kept him on edge and made him unnecessarily anxious. At around 3 or 4 a.m., he was getting the feeling that maybe this spot wasn't so bad after all, and his anxiety was just from him hearing rumors. Then he heard the faint sound of footsteps. He put out his cigarette and tightened his grip on his .357 Magnum sidearm. The sound of brush being pushed away and footsteps got closer. The moon was lower now, and it was very dark, but he could see the silhouettes of 3 men come into view. They emerged from the bush, but something was off about their appearance. He thought maybe that it was the lack of light, but their silhouettes were pitch black. It was dark, but these forms looked like they were darker than night. Their eyes were glowing, similar to how a cat's would if you shined a light at their face in the dark. He called out to them, but they kept moving, ignoring his commands completely to freeze. They walk in a single file line, slowly ambling along the path. He points his vehicle spotlight at them and feels his blood run cold. The forms look like shadows cast on a wall in a puppet show. He said it looked like somebody was walking in front of his spotlight, but the shadows that were cast were disembodied and didn't belong to anything. He stood there in awe and fear for probably 45 minutes. The forms were gone, and there was no longer any sound coming from the brush. He went down to check the sand trap and found that it was still smooth, and it was like that there was never anybody that had crossed that area. He suddenly felt dreadful, as though something was watching him. The feeling wouldn't go away, and he started to feel fearful. He got in his vehicle and left. He drove straight to Eagle Pass, and since my grandpa came in early, he heard everything from the now shaken Mr. L. My grandpa didn't have a fun time, as Mr. L didn't bother to lock the numerous ranch gates behind him. I wish I could say this is the fun part of the story, where my grandpa goes over there to close it for him and see the spot for himself, but he had stuff to do, and delivered the keys back to the Del Rio station and let them take care of it. Mr. L never went back to that area, but he stopped making fun of his fellow colleagues' stories. Funnily enough, not much changed about him. He wasn't scared of anything and was a mean guy all around, but whenever Mr. L retold the story at later times, my dad could tell that it was an event that really shook him. My grandpa continued to hear stories about that remote Del Rio post, but over time he heard less about it as he was given assignments that took him away from that town. He believes it was haunted, and people said that there was an evil there. And although they never caught anybody in that area in his 7 years as a Border Patrol agent, there was surely something crossing over. This one is another one of my grandpa's Border Patrol stories. It's another one that didn't happen to my grandpa, but was told by his colleague as they were exchanging stories one morning at the station. His colleague, who we'll call Angus, was another one of those true Texan types, no bullshit. He graduated from Texas A&M University and was a bona fide cowboy, and had worked as a ranch hand for years before coming on to the Texas Border Patrol. He would patrol ranches and other properties near the border on horseback. He would also monitor sand traps and look for anything or anyone suspicious. This one instance took place near Rio Grande City. He was on horseback in the middle of nowhere on a ranch in Starr County, Texas. The sun was hot, and he hadn't come across anything or anybody for hours. He was miles away from any service road, much less a county road. And then he started to get thirsty. He took a quick break to drink some water and get his horse hydrated too. He wiped the sweat off his brow when, maybe 500 feet away, he saw a figure moving across the plains at a decent pace. He took a sip out of his canteen and got his binoculars out. He could see it was an older man, with a cowboy hat, riding a horse at a slight trot. Angus closed his canteen and put his binoculars back around his neck. He radioed in the incident and mounted his horse and took off after the person, hoping to intercept him. He started off with his horse at a full gallop, kicking up dust behind him. The area was hilly, and he passed a bend and saw the rider was now further away than he was before. Confused, but determined, Angus drove his spurs into the side of his horse to goad it into going faster. They started to gain ground on the other rider. He disappeared around another bend, but Angus was close behind. When Angus came around the bend, he saw the rider was even further away. Angus started to get pissed off. He felt that obviously this guy was screwing with him, and he was ready to apprehend him. He gets his horse to go even faster. His hat was barely hanging on, and everything was shaking and starting to come loose from their holsters and bags. He gained on the figure yet again, but after another bend, the figure came even farther away. He had never made his horse go this fast. Its grunts were harsh and labored. After each bend, the figure got farther and farther away until finally it disappeared. For fear of his horse's safety, he called off the pursuit and radioed in that the suspect had got away. He dismounted and gave his horse some water. They probably traveled about 5 to 10 miles from where they originally spotted the lone horseback rider. He decided to double back. He started to notice that the only tracks were his own. No other tracks but the ones from his horse were found the whole way back. He told everyone at the McAllen horseback unit about it and asked them if they had ever experienced anything like it, but not one of them believed him. They all said it was a mirage or a heat stroke. Angus assured them that he knew the signs of heat stroke and his own limits. He had been a ranch hand for years after all. He wouldn't have continued if he was not well enough to do so. He let it go for a little while, but told my grandpa eventually when he did some work in Eagle Pass. He never seemed scared about it, but just really confused and perplexed. He continued working in that area of Starr County, but he never experienced anything like that again. So I'll do my best to tell this story right and get all the details sorted out. In the fall of 2012, I was 20, and I was living in a small town not far from Webster, Texas. My dog happened to escape and ran off into the woods, so I went to go look for her. I look for hours, even after it gets dark. There's a full moon, plus I have a mini mag light on a keychain, so there's no biggie I can see. And then I start hearing random baby crying in the woods. This is the middle of nowhere, but I assume it's just bad people dumping it. I gotta emphasize, as morbid as it sounds, there are easier, more convenient places to dump a baby than the middle of a thicket. So in my mind, I now have two objectives. I start to haul ass toward the cries to try and catch the people leaving the baby and maybe save the baby. I get closer, and the baby crying sounds less like a baby and more animal, but not quite 100%. And I think, oh, I don't know anything about babies, so maybe it's still just a baby that's, in pain or something. I've hunted coyotes before at night in this valley since I was a little kid, sneaking up and closing in on their packs by following the sound of their almost constant squabbling. I was sort of applying the same technique to close in on the baby, or at least get close enough to start actually looking with my eyes. The crying baby is definitely about 15 to 20 yards in front of me when the crying suddenly stops. It gets eerily quiet, but I freeze patiently, waiting for it to start again so as not to lose my bearings in the dark. I'm straining to listen. The crying starts again, only now it's 50 to 100 yards in the opposite direction. And I think, what the hell? So I wheel around. I close in again. I'm extra sneaky this time because something is up. Last time I was making more noise through the brush. I get close, actually even closer this time than before. The baby sounds gross, just gross. Like 1/4 of a cat meowing, 1/4 of a baby goat being slaughtered, and half of a newborn baby wailing. And the wahs were long, like this kid had a serious pair of lungs on him. And I think, whatever, I still have to save this baby. So despite my creeping along a lot quieter, I get 15 yards away, and the crying stops again. I freeze. I'm again straining to hear anything because it's dead quiet. And then I hear something at least the size of a dog rustling in the bushes. I get excited, hoping that it's my lost dog. I call her name and make the baby mushy noises grown men do for their dogs only. The rutting stops, and no response. The hairs on my neck stand up like I'm being watched. I'm straining my eyes and ears to see into shadows of the thicket, or to hear even the tiniest twig snap or collar jiggle. And then I hear the baby cry again. But once again, it's in the wrong direction from where it used to be. And at this point, I'm getting really creeped out by this supposedly teleporting inhuman-ass sounding baby now. I think it screwed being sneaky. I'm finding that baby noise. I make a perfectly straight line, going through the bramble and thickets, only straying off course to go around bigger trees, so as not to lose my bearings. I'm getting cut up like crazy, but making good progress despite. Suddenly, I break into a clearing, and I fall on my face because there aren't any branches and stuff holding me back anymore. The baby is very close. The moonlight, added with the light pollution, probably from nearby Houston I imagine, made it very easy to see. The baby is just on the other side of a small stand of trees by the opposite tree line. So I haul ass over there. The stand of trees and the rest of the woods surrounding the clearing make like a tunnel. The baby is inside the tunnel, 100% positive. The sounds are very eerie now. There's definitely something wrong with this baby. I don't know what, but it just doesn't sound right. I go into the tunnel. The baby is still crying. About 15 feet in front of me are some bushes. The crying stops, but I don't care because I already know where it is and I just have to keep looking with the flashlight. I look some more. I keep looking, and I think, okay, where the hell is that damn baby? There's nothing in this tunnel but weird scraps of trash and other things. Nothing crazy, just the inescapable litter that gets blown in by the wind that you can find anywhere in the woods when not in a pristine park or a preserve. I keep looking for this baby because this time I was positive that it was there. But then a piece of trash catches my eye. It's a candle. There's several of them. I think, oh, that's weird. So I picked it up, and it was still warm and soft to the touch. Not quite melted still, but it had definitely been used recently. I freak out a little bit, but I write it off as goth kids being goth kids or whatever. But the hairs on the back of my neck stand up again, and that feeling of being watched returns. Something in the treetops rustled, and I shot straight up and wheeled around on it with my light. I'm looking through the branches, but I don't see anything. This flashlight that I had was now giving me a major tunnel vision, making me feel vulnerable in that tunnel. I look around for the baby one last time before switching the light off. I am walking off, telling myself it's all in my head because I'm stressed out about my dog missing or whatever. So I'm walking along the tree line in the clearing back to where I busted through to retrace my steps and get out of there using the trail that I had made in my adrenaline-fueled ruckus. I feel something watching me yet again. But this time, I see a shape out of the corner of my eye. I turn my head to look. It looked like a roughly human-sized silhouette, crouched on a branch too thin to hold something that big. It was so weird looking, like a giant porcupine or someone in a ghillie suit, or maybe like a giant nest of some sort. I stare straight at it for a long time, frozen. I figure it's just a huge squirrel nest or something. But then suddenly, an arm extends from the shape. A clearly visible, bony hand opens up and grabs a branch. This arm looked like it had feathers or long matted fur to make like dreads, and then it grabs a nearby branch and just swooshes itself into the darkness and out of view with a ridiculous speed. I bolted out of those woods with the small log I was using as a club when I had started creeping out earlier. I was using the log as a face shield and just hauling ass and plowing my way through the brush. I ran until eventually, I miraculously came out of the woods a couple 100 yards away from my truck from where I'd first entered the woods earlier that day. After this, I hopped in my truck and I hauled ass all the way home. I never went back to those woods or even down the road that runs by them. And I recently told my girlfriend about this, and being Hispanic, she said it was the Lechusa, a WitchBird I have only heard of because of my Hispanic buddies joke about it whenever we go camping in the woods. I just shrugged it off because I figured there couldn't be that, right? But then I got reading about them more, and it turns out that they do indeed mimic the sound of a crying infant to draw people out into the woods and do God knows what with them. And if you're wondering, I did eventually find my dog. She came back in one piece, thankfully. So, what'd you think of those stories? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have a story of your own? I have an email address in the description below where you can send stories that you would like me to read and narrate. I also have a link to a PayPal and a Patreon there if you want to donate to the channel. And one thing I'd like to talk about with the last story, with the WitchBird, I think that translates to owl, like the actual word. So I wonder if it has any connection with sightings of the Owl Man that the creature has been dubbed. There was one in the UK in the 70s, and there's been some in Japan, I believe, and probably more in Texas that I haven't found out about on the internet, but I kind of wonder if it's like the same type of cryptid, I don't know, the same breed. I'm not sure how all that works with them. I actually wonder if it's kind of similar to the Texas Batman sighting of the 1950s. See if I can pull that up real quick here. I'm going to pause it so I can pull that up. Okay, I have something here. This is from ABC 13. Yeah, it was 2:30 a.m. on June 18th, 1953, in the Houston Heights. 3 neighbors claimed they saw something extraordinary just a few feet from their home. And then it goes on to say that the Houston Chronicle detailed the encounter. Hilda Walker, a 23-year-old housewife, and 2 of her neighbors were sitting on their front porch, and suddenly Hilda noticed a large shadow moving across the lawn. It was then that they could make out its form. One of the witnesses, Howard Phillips, a tool plant inspector, that's a job you don't see every day now, told the Houston Chronicle, "I could hardly believe it, but I saw it. It appeared to be a very tall man, or a man-like figure, standing about 6.5 feet tall, but with bat-like wings attached to its back. It almost seemed to be encased in a halo of glowing light." And it doesn't give them on this ABC article, but it does talk about how the sightings of this date back hundreds of years. It doesn't give any other accounts like that, but it just kind of occurred to me that I had read about that a while ago, so I wanted to find that again. If you'd like to see me talk about it in a future video, maybe do like an actual segment on it, then comment below and I might be able to put something together. But anyways, besides that tangent, I hope you enjoyed the video, and yeah, thank you for pulling up a stump with me, thank you for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Oh, and here are some other videos that you might like to watch.